Hey, DM Dango here with another review from the DM's Guild. This time, we're looking at Honor and Devotions, Traditions and Legends of the Far East. If I go east far enough, does it become west? So, Honor and Devotions, what are you getting in this supplement? Honor and Devotions is kind of a collection of everything you need as a player to start doing your Far Eastern kind of player. It's kind of your character. So it's got races, it's got class archetypes, it's even got its own class. In addition, it's got a couple of magical items and a character sheet for the new class, the Yojimbo. So all told, it's everything you need to kind of start that journey, as it were. Now, where do all these classes ideas come from? Where do all these racial ideas come from? It also includes a couple of feats as well. Where does all that come from? Well, the inspiration for this, according to the authors, comes from films, novels, anime, past editions of Dungeons & Dragons. I can even remember playing a Wu Gen in the old 3.5 edition. So they have a lot of stuff to draw from. But most importantly, everything, in here comes from the real traditions and legends of China, India, and Japan, and the rest of the real-world Eastern continent. Their goal was to show the utmost respect and enthusiasm for all the sources through these adaptations. And it really shows. There is a lot of time and care taken to kind of flesh out the lore and give these, racial options or character options, or even there's class option, a real depth and meaning to each one, without feeling like overtly caricatures of their representatives. So there is, like, for instance, Shinobi, but it doesn't feel like that kind of hackneyed or very overly over the top anime stuff you might get in, say, the D&D wiki. Not to say that everything in the D&D wiki is like that, but I have seen a Super Saiyan in there, and I think that proves my point. So, let's start with the racial options. We've got 4 racial options that are new, brand new, like brand spanking new, and then we've got one subrace, a dwarven subrace, the Korobo Kuro. Sorry, my pronunciations are going to be a little wonky in this. I don't speak fluent Japanese, I speak a little bit. And I definitely don't speak any of the Indian languages, and I definitely don't speak any of the Chinese dialects either. The new dwarven subrace, you've got that. You've got the Hengo Kyokai, which are kind of a shapeshifter race, but they specific to what they can only change into one kind of animal. There's one in there which I really like because it's a reference to the tanuki, which is a Japanese kind of raccoon dog style thing. It's not really a raccoon, it's kind of a raccoon, and there are legends surrounding them. Specifically, there's a whole Ghibli movie based on them. One of my favorites called Pompoko, and essentially they use their nutsacks to fly. Anyways, the Hengyokai are kind of a shape-shifting race. Then you've got the Kuotoa, which are very different from their Faerun cousins. Or more specifically, they're kind of like the Sword Coast variant, as it were. You wouldn't see these ones in the Monster Manual. They have a whole class and caste structure to them as well. And it's really interesting to see kind of how much different they are. I really like the idea behind them where they essentially kind of worship everything everywhere, and they worship all of it. And each time a new kind of high priest comes along, they kind of change all of their belief structure around this new high priest taking over. And so at one minute they can be friendly on friendly terms with things like Palor and the Dawnfather and all of those kinds of the normal Forgotten Realms pantheon, and the next they can be bitter enemies. It's really interesting, this kind of madness that they've been brought about, kind of parallel to kind of the madness that was brought about from them, when they were on the elemental plane of water into the main, Forgotten Realms storylines. But it's kind of got this neat little twist to it around this whole kind of worship structure. So then you have the Pandaren. Probably should have put a trigger warning for all the WoW people out there. But these kind of feel like more like your hermit-style race where you have a very strict caste structure, very strict kind of everyone needs to be doing their job, and if they're not, they get exiled. So, then you have the spirit folk, and they kind of choose one of three main subclasses, river, sea, or bamboo. And they each have like slightly different things, but what essentially they amount to is kind of a connection with the kami of the world, kind of the more broad kind of concepts here is that there are spirits that kind of inhabit or embody various things, and sometimes they take a liking to humans, basically. So a human mate will pair and they'll have a child, and that child might be a spirit folk. If, for instance, their parents did something to kind of ingratiate them to a spirit, and they have various different abilities, and they have that are relevant to their specific kind of sub-race. So they have, for instance, the sea ones have supernatural abilities to predict the weather, and they can breathe in air and water. It will be said, however, none of the races or even the sub-race options feel overpowered or broken in any way, and they all feel unique and interesting across the board, and they have enough lore to ground them in this world really well. It's a really nice thing to see, and none of them feel like over-the-top characters of things they're trying to represent. So I know some of the Japanese mythology, and I recognize some of the things here. It's a shame they didn't put in the Tanuki ball sacks, but that's okay. Next time. So, Chapter 2, the archetypes of the character. This is where it gets a little more complicated, because this is where I think there's some bits and pieces that I feel are a little unbalanced or even a little broken in some areas. But there are other ones that I really like. You got all of the kind of main classes. So barbarians, monks, rogues, wizards, warlocks, sorcerers, Draco Knights. Wait, what? There's an archetype in here for a class that's not in the main kind of lexicon. It's another one that's produced by Outlandish Adventures, and so it's a subclass from one of his offerings. This is one of those cases where I think it would have been better to include the base class and then say, here's the archetype for that class, and have the base one as part of this offering as well. Because when I saw it, I was like, ooh, this is kind of interesting, this is unique, but I've never heard of Draco Knight, and I thought I'd been kind of going along on a good clip, and I got kind of like hung up on it. It was a little odd and a little jarring for me until I realized what had gone on, and that this was a class that had been done, by these people before. So it would be nice to see that in there, but I don't think it's a complete deal breaker. Now, the rest of the archetypes in here I really do like, with one exception. Now, I'll talk about some of the other ones I like first. I like the barbarian variant. It felt at first when I was starting to read it that it was just kind of a hybrid between barbarian and monk with the ability to do extra damage with unarmed attacks. But as I kind of got more and more into it and kind of read the later abilities, it feels like, no, this is a class on of its own. This is definitely a path that feels well rounded and fits a lot with the barbarian kind of archetypes. The College of Heikyoko, which is the bard archetype, I really like the concepts of. The one thing I would say here is that there's an extra resource to manage as a bard. You've got this idea of spiritual performance that you can do, and it kind of unlocks your later abilities. So like when you're doing a spiritual performance, you can do this as well. When you're doing a spiritual performance, you can do this as well. I like the ideas of them, the lore behind them, having to remove your eyes in order to more greatly appreciate and understand the beauty of the world, and being able to do these kind of powerful performances kind of is really evocative and very well done. I just wish that you used the Bardic Inspiration dice for the spiritual performance instead. It would have been easier to manage, and it doesn't create an extra resource. I understand there may be reasons in terms of balance for using you didn't do that, but it kind of gets in my craw a bit, especially in spellcaster classes, because they have a lot to manage already with their spells, and then adding more stuff in there, it's like, okay, I've got this other thing. The other one I want to talk about here is the monk way of the Sohei. I really like this idea, and the Cavalier is kind of similar to this, where you've got this class that's particularly suited to mounted combat. Now, it doesn't happen all the time in D&D, and we think about Dungeons and Dragons in terms of dungeons, as in how did you get a mount in a dungeon? But a lot of campaigns now have mounts or over land. For instance, large portions of the Tomb of Annihilation series are all done over land, where a mount is incredibly useful. And mounts can be kind of small. If you think about a halfling monk's mount is a dog. And a dog is only a medium creature, and therefore could probably get into a lot of the areas that, say, a dungeon. He could ride through the dungeon. I'm now thinking about the character in Labyrinth, the dog, I think it's a fox that rides a dog, that rides that dog into battle. And that's what I'm thinking about. But anyways, this Way of the Sohei is like an idea where a monk kind of binds themselves with their mount, spiritually. A lot more ingrained than the Cavalier that kind of existed in, I think it's an Unearthed Arcana and, it's the Xanathar's Guide now, isn't it? It's more around this idea of kind of you are your mount. You eventually you kind of channel your ki into your mount. And it really works really well. And I really like it from that perspective. The one I had a little bit of an issue with, the wizard variant. Wizards always cause this problem, because they are so close to being overpowered in everything they do that they may as well be all the time, because wizards are, by their definition, masters of physics. They are masters of the physical world. They can wreck things faster than anything else. They can destroy economies very quickly, and this one kind of is no exception. They have an ability where they can craft a scroll, essentially, very quickly and very cheaply. It takes 10 minutes and 10 gold to craft any spell scroll of any level instantly. The caveat being is that when they do this, the scroll essentially holds their spell slot. They can't cast using that spell slot until that scroll is used, and at which point the spell slot becomes available to them. But there's nothing stopping a wizard from, binding this spell up, selling it to somebody, and kind of waiting for their spells to come back. Potentially even low-level spells. A lot of those spells, those spell scrolls are worth quite a pretty penny. You can sell them. Now, the question is would a nefarious DM leave it in stock for ages and basically bind that spell scroll to forever or not? It's hard to say. Especially with certain spells that get used more frequently. This is one of those ones where, another one of those classes where I'm like, this is getting... Saying that, however, beyond those initial misgivings, I really like the ideas behind this subclass. It has a lot of stuff around teaching and tutelage and kind of passing knowledge on. It has abilities to let you cast other spells from other people. You kind of like taking this idea of, I teach you how to use this. I'm going to teach you how to cast spells from my scroll. It's going to take me an hour to figure out, you need to do this, you need to do this, you need to do this. These hand gestures like this, and nothing else, and then say these words, and you can cast this spell, even if you weren't able to before, and you can cast it. And it's really, really interesting. There are some caveats where you're like, I cast this spell, and he maintains concentration for me. It means that people who cast stuff for you, unless they're, backline casters, and they're going to want to be maintaining their own concentration spells, then you're talking about like fighters and barbarians who are taking hits all the time, and the odds of them maintaining concentration are very low. Now for this one, I would probably want to playtest this one quite heavily, and I suspect the users the creators have done so to kind of figure out, in play, it probably is very balanced, but it gives me some niggle warnings. And I think it will give other DMs out there wiggle warnings. Well, they'll go, ooh, I don't like that. Kind of in the same way that Mystic gives a lot of those DMs. Go like, ooh, that looks... Chapter 3, the Yojimbo class. I really like this class. I think there's a lot to say here, and I'm going to try and be quick so I can get through the whole video without being 20 minutes long. It's a really cool idea, and it doesn't suffer from a lot of the problems that other D&D 5th edition classes suffer from. And that's kind of a lack of choice. When you're leveling up other classes, there's a few exceptions to this fighter, most notably because of the amount of feats they get and kind of abilities they can do and play around with. A lot of the other classes out there, kind of, you get to a certain point, you get to like level 3 or so, and your choices are kind of done. You don't make any more choices. You get stronger, yeah, but you don't make many more choices. Yeah, Bard chooses spells every level, and that can infer and change the ways they do things, but for the most part, no, they kind of stay the same. You can multi-class at every level, but then multi-classing in general is quite rare. They did a recent survey to say how many people actually multi-class in terms of their builds. It's quite low. I think it was lower than 10% from what I remember. So that's not really an option. But the other problem with this kind of idea is that saying, well, I want lots of choice. It's like, well, Pathfinder has lots of choice. Pathfinder has like a lot of choice. And I think the Yojimbo class strikes the nice balance. Lots of choice, but every choice is meaningful. It doesn't feel like I've got 80 choices and only 10 of them are any good and the other 60 are awful. And then there's like 10 that are like, eh. The main crux of the class kind of comes around this idea of a balance. You've got this ability called the Kamea, which are stances you can switch into. You switch into a stance and you do a thing, and you switch into a stance and you do a different thing. As part of switching into that stance, you can spend another balance points. And you have positive and negative balance points. And you can either spend one or the other. And every time you make a long, I think it's a long and a short or a short rest, you choose how many balance points of each type you'll have. So you could say, well, at the start of the day, I wanted 3 positive and 2 negative. And when you go to change your stances, you go, okay, well, I'm in this stance now, and I'm going to, as part of the stance, I'm going to spend a negative and a positive point to gain both benefits. Or I can choose to spend none and gain, I can choose to spend one or the other and gain only one of the benefits. And it's really interesting, that kind of choice. And each stance is also a choice. You can choose multiple stances and choose different ones to use. It's also nice to have lots of choice in combat as well for primarily a melee fighter, although there is a variant in here that has some magical spells as well. So it is nice to have all of that choice in the kind of the martial class. Chapter 4, feats. I'm not going to spend too much time here because the majority of these feats are specific to the races that are presented inside the module. They're things like anthropomorphic, that allows you to, as part of your shape-shifting abilities, you're a little bit more proficient with them. You can cast spells during them, and you can retain certain ability scores that are more powerful. Kamea Deshi, which allows you to take some of the stances from the Yojimbo class and use them in your existing your basic fighter, your warlock or your wizard or whatever you want to use if you so choose to do so. But a lot of them are kind of, like I said, specific to those races. Chapter 5. The magical items, the ones everyone loves to read, because who doesn't love to look at an amazing sword or a beautiful artwork or some dusty tome that holds untold secrets. Here, however, you've got kind of very themed items, and there's one set of items I really liked in this, and it was the 9 golden ornaments. And they're a set of 9 items. And they remind me of an anime where there were 9, like, samurai-esque people. And essentially they would do battle and, kind of like very old, late 80s, early 90s anime kind of style stuff. Where you would have a whole bunch of people, and they would eventually learn that they can combine into more powerful armors by, merging together an event. And then, if they all 9 of them combine, they become this, like, golden superpowered armor. That kind of follows along here as well. You have you know, these 9 things, and once they're combined, they turn into the Nitobe, which is kind of the manifestation of all of the Bushido. It has all of the tenets inside them. Each of the 9 pieces also represents one of the tenets of Bushido. And this, you know, Nitobe is the embodiment, the living embodiment of Bushido. And I could see a really cool campaign setting where you have some of these 9 artifacts, or you're trying to collect them to return them to the rightful owner, or even to create the Nitobe and to kind of give it what it wants, or even use it to slay some great evil. And I really like that idea, and I really like that magical item. It's a really cool, really well done, structured thing. It is an artifact, so it is insanely powerful because it has all the powers of the other 9. And then the 9, some of their abilities are pretty strong anyways, but they're all artifacts as well. So it's like, yeah, they're really rare. Don't give them to your party level 1 kind of style of stuff. So finally, last thing in the supplement is a Yojimbo character sheet, which has everything kind of explained out for you, all the rules for Yojimbos. Minus things like the Bushido code features that you get at certain levels, because obviously there are a lot of different Bushido codes, a lot of archetypes you can choose, so you can't, you know, you have to write those in. But everything else is there, like what you get at level 5, what you get at level 14, you know, everything the same. It's a nice little custom character sheet, nice little touch to have, just that extra little thing to make it a little easier. My final closing thoughts for this. What did I think about the overall module? There are 2 things that kind of stuck. One of them was the fact that the Draco Knight is in here and its base class isn't. That feels a little wonky to me. Now, I could be wrong. If somebody's following, you know, Outlandish Adventures and they have all of his stuff and they love it, they love the Draco Knight and they love this addition to it, that's fine. But for somebody who just wants like a Far Eastern kind of starting point for players, I would think that adding the Draco Knight as a base class would help a lot with that. The other thing is that there's enough imbalance in the wizard that irks me a little. But everything else is really good by contrast. Everything is really well presented lore-wise, really well presented in terms of how it fits and how it's put together and how it's structured. There's a lot of great little stories here and a lot of great little things. So this is a really great little module. And I really like kind of everything that it encompasses. I really love, you know, I love Far Eastern cultures. I don't think I'm a weeaboo, but I am close. I have been to Japan multiple times. I've kind of experienced the culture. My wife lived in Japan for 3 years. So I love those cultures, and some of the being exposed to some of the other ones that are presented here, some of the more Indian and Chinese ones that I don't have as much of a grounding or kind of a understanding of, was really nice to see, even if they aren't exactly represented. One of the things I actually would have loved to see in addition to this, and it's not something that detracts it, but just something that would be kind of interesting, is where the inspiration specifically for each like option came from. The detractions that I do have are minor at best. I think it deserves a 4.5 out of 5, but not a full 5 stars. Because of that issue with the Draco Knight, and because of the slight balance issue with the perceived balance issue. It's a hard one to address. It could be that the wizard, and if it was just the wizard, I wouldn't have even detracted a 0.5 point. I'd have gone, no, that's fine. You're okay. That's probably me just worrying about wizards being buttheads half the time. But anyways, so 4.5 out of 5 is still a very good score for something this large. If I only found those tiny niggles out of 47 pages of content, you did very well. So thank you. Please do remember to like and subscribe. I hope to keep doing more of these. And as always, please use my affiliate links if you're going to purchase anything. It helps me out, helps the channel out, helps me purchase more things from the DM's Guild so I can do more reviews. I do get a lot of my reviews sent to me, you know, gratis, but occasionally I do have to, you know, shell out for one here or there. So thank you and peace out.